Thank you, everybody, for tuning in for the grand finale of the Successful in the SLV series, Rockstar Graduates and Educators, as we hear about Dr. Johanna Mays' wonderful research and the work she's doing at CU Boulder. And on that note, tell me a little bit more about your research. You've got 2 books out. So
I do.
proud of you. That's awesome.
One here. Yes, so I'll talk about them specifically. This first book, Journeys of Social Justice, Women of Color Presidents in the Academy. You could tell this is how I wrote my own book. This was a wonderful experiment for me. Dr. Minna Pratt-Clark, she is the she's the vice president and vice provost at Virginia Tech. And I didn't know her. Again, this is another example of lifting as we climb. African-American woman, has both her PhD and her JD. She's like this amazing woman. She was hounding me online for months. She's like, I read your dissertation, which happened to be on Latino university presidents. And I was analyzing their social, cultural, and leadership experiences and how they contributed to their presidencies. First of its kind. And she found it. And she's like, I want to work with you somehow. And so she had access to speeches. She had done, it's called Women Faculty of Color Conference that she used to do. Now she still does at Virginia Tech. And she had gathered the speeches of some women from that conference and got permission to use those speeches. And then we outreached to other women of color in the academy and asked them to write their stories. And those stories, along with our research, is in this book. And so we did this amazing book it was 2 years out of my life. I never once met her in person. It was all on the phone, all virtually, and pulling this together. Parts of my dissertation is in this book as well, where I highlighted 2 of the 3 women in the book that I interviewed and talked about their experiences as Latino university presidents. And we premiered this book 3 years ago at Virginia Tech, and it was so well received. Women of color in that conference they were just really flabbergasted at the narratives of these women that we feature in this book. 2 of the women here and on the cover, Dr. Rusty Barcelo and Dr. Wadet Cruzado, were featured in my dissertation. And they changed my life by far. They welcomed me with open arms for my research that I did on their lives for my dissertation. And so we included their work in this book. And so that was my first book. Questions about this before I move on?
Yeah, so how many Latina women presidents are there in the U.S.?
Right now, there's about, and this is both for community colleges and four-year institutions, there's less than 20, roughly 20. At the time when I did my research, which started in 2011, there were less than 10.
Wow.
Yeah, and I just focused on four-year institutions, women who are leading four-year institutions, and I focused on 3 of the 10. And amazingly, they all knew each other, and so their stories were so similar, where they knew each other, but they didn't know each other's path. But yeah, there's more in community college systems than there are in the four-year institutions.
And what was the common theme with them?
First-generation college students, raised by powerful women, as I mentioned to you earlier, being able to negotiate these surroundings of being the only one, being proud of how they represent themselves. So 2 of the women I interviewed for my dissertation have thick Spanish accents, and being proud of that, speaking Spanish whenever they could in person, in public. All 3 of them had this strand of activism that they were all known in their communities and in their states for their activism for marginalized communities. Not conforming to what's expected of them as women or as women leaders. So showing up, wearing bright clothing and jewelry and displaying their art in their offices that was bright, and not having to dress down like a professor or like a president in the tweed, having a strong connection to their spirituality. It wasn't necessarily religion, but it was more spirituality. Giving back to their communities, doing it for the sense of their communities. One of the presidents I interviewed, Dr. Elsa Nunez, she's still a president right now at Eastern Connecticut State University. And I just recently saw a YouTube video of her that I use in my classes that talks about how, she was in the middle of her quad area on her campus screaming on behalf of the DACA students and fired up and saying how we need to support DACA students. And I was like, holy crap. And how everybody knows them as these mother figures, and they know them by their first names, and how they are always approachable, which is what you don't see in mainstream university and college presidents. I always play that trick with my students as we read my research in my classes. And I said, okay, first, before we start reading my stuff, how many of you know the president of CU? And they're all looking at each other. They're like, I don't know. Mm-hmm. How do you know the chancellor of the CU? Well, we think his name is this, but have you ever seen him? They're like, no. And then I bring the examples of these women. I says, each of these women, I was on their campuses with them. Everybody knew them by name. Everybody knew who they were. They are approachable. They're accessible. I says, that's the difference of bringing that comunidad, cariño to our constituents. So those are the big, big differences that you see between these 2 different types of presidents, for sure.
And so where were they from? What was their background?
So Rusty Barceló, she is originally from New Mexico, and at the time she was president of Northern New Mexico College. She's no longer president there, she's retired. Lesbian, Chicana, radical, the first Chicana graduate of University of Iowa as an undergrad ever in the 70s. The other one is Dr. Wader Cruzado. She's still the president of Montana State University. She's originally from Puerto Rico, raised by all women. She stands about 4'11", amazing powerhouse woman. She's the one that we need to watch out for, where she's going to be leading the Harvards and Stanfords one day. I guarantee. And then Dr. Elsa Nunez, Eastern Connecticut State. She's originally from Puerto Rico as well, and would tell me beautiful stories about when her family moved from Puerto Rico to New York, and because she spoke only Spanish, they put her in classrooms that were for special needs kids. And she was sat in a corner all day long next to a kid named Daryl who drew horses all day, because that's how they warehoused our kids back then. And now all her life, look at her trajectory, and she's a university president. And so it's the narratives of these women that we're told because nobody tells them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
my big thing, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to do this. You know, we've got to tell our own stories.
Yep.
There's that line that I keep talking about from the movie Walkout. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but I talk about that in my book, in the acknowledgments. That was sort of a big catalyst to why I decided to write my book as well, and why I'm doing this, because one of the first lines in that movie, the teacher is telling the students, if it's not written, it didn't happen. Exactly. And so here we are, you know, we're writing our own stories, telling it like we see it, and doing it for ourselves. And I think that's so powerful.
Absolutely.
So Absolutely. 2 comments and I guess sort of side questions. Authenticity sounds like a big thing, and confidence. And what does it take to be at the top on your own? When you say that, when you say knowing how to handle being in that space, you know, what are the characteristics that you've got to pull out or dig deep for?
You need to recognize that things like imposter syndrome exist. Things like insecurities exist. Things like microaggressions exist. And then you need to find ways to dismantle them. So recognizing that you aren't going crazy, that these are the things that happen to people who are trailblazers, which is a kind of ridiculous term, I understand, but people who are the first, we often second guess ourselves, often, and we don't know, we don't have anyone else to look up to, so we are it. And so it's about recognizing and dismantling. And it's also about finding others who are like-minded. They may have not have gone through the same path as you, but they need to stand next to you in the struggle, and next to you however you feel they can be. And they need to hold your hand, because they need to hold your hand when things get really ugly, because they do. And they need to hold your hand when you need to celebrate, because you will. And so those are some of the things that come to mind right off the bat when you said that.
I love that. That's so cool to think about, and powerful, you know, to know that that's what you've got inside you, and you've got to keep telling yourself that all the time. Yeah. And then you said strong women, that they were raised by strong women, powerful women. So give me some examples of that, because I know we've got a lot of abuelas and, you know, tias that are powerful, strong women in our lives. And so give me sort of the quick description of what that looked like for these women and for you.
So Wadea Cruzado, the president of Montana State, she was raised in her household. Her mom and her aunts and her grandmother, I believe, they all lived in one house. And it was just, that was the vibe in the house. I mean, they worked their butts off doing their labor jobs, but all the girls had to go to college, and they had to, it was just this sense of resilience that she grew up with, that she carried on in everything she did. So she was really lucky. Rusty Barcelo, she credits, she has a beautiful story. Rusty has a long braid, and it goes all the way down to the floor. To this, yeah. And her mom was this role model for her. I can't remember what her profession was, but when Rusty was the first graduate of the University of Iowa, she too experienced many of the things that I was telling you that I experienced at CU. And Rusty's mom would tell her, you know, Mija, when things get rough, you know, even as before her mom passed away, she says, grab your braid and stroke it, because that is our strength. Our hair is our strength, she said.
Wow. And that's biblical too.
It totally is. It is. Yeah. And so as I was talking to Rusty and interviewing her, she still had the braid, and she would stroke it, because it was tough. It was a tough position for her to be, you know, as a president and all the forces that didn't want her in this world. And Elsa Nunez, her mother was still in her life. Last time I talked with her, she would bring her mother on campus for like homecoming, and her mom, everybody on campus knew when Elsa's mom and dad were there. It's like so crazy to me. And they would have this parade down the main street of Willimantic, Connecticut, and Elsa would always have her mom and dad on the float with her, and everybody knew the mom and dad, oh, they're in town. And she would bring her staff candy from Puerto Rico, but she made it a family affair about saying, I'm not doing this job by myself. I'm doing this job as a legacy from my family. My own personal experience, I come from a family of feminists. I'm the youngest of 4 daughters. My mother was a strong feminist as an artist. My grandmother was a farm worker. My grandmother was probably my hugest influence growing up. A little tiny lady who used to teach me how to dance. So we would 2-step together in her living room, and her arthritic hands, and she would always tell me, she was like, would use this tool to pick the beats. And she says, and my hands got so arthritic. She says that I did that work so you can do the work inside. She says, I don't want you to be outside. And so again, she would say, I don't know what this college thing is, and I don't understand it, but I know that it's going to prepare you for doing work in an air-conditioned office, or, and you don't have to be outside and get arthritis. And so I remember those stories that she would tell me. And so we're blessed with this female power. And I never, ever, ever take it for granted, ever. My sisters are strong women, beautiful, powerful, loving mothers, and I look up to their force that they do within their own lives and their community in Pueblo. And so it's something that I don't take lightly. I carry it with me everywhere I go.
Such a blessing.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of that. Love it.
Of course.
Now your next book. Tell me more about that one.
Case Studies in Equity and Diversity and Inclusion in Higher Ed, an Intersectional Perspective. This is a brainchild of me and one of my very best friends, Dr. Elena Sandoval Lucero. Elena and I met each other while we worked at Metro State University. And at that time, it was crazy. It was crazy town. And we bonded because we never knew each other. We had to exist in this crazy higher ed world. And we worked there for a few years, and then we remained very good friends. And she was highly, in getting back to this female power, she was highly instrumental in my finishing my doctoral program. She had had her doctorate probably 10 years before I did. And so she coached me all the way through this process. I would come home from class and I was like, I'm gonna pull my hair out. I'm one of 2 brown people in my whole program. I'm one of 3 people of color in my whole program, and it's driving me crazy. And she would talk me off the ledge. And so as the years went on and we both were in higher ed, she says, we have some stories to tell about our experiences in higher ed. And we've worked with people who have stories to tell. We need to get it together in a book that people can learn from. And so what we did is that we did a call for proposals, and folks that we know and folks that we don't know submitted their case studies that involved actual experiences that they or someone in their lives have had in working through equity and diversity and inclusion. And this was such a cathartic process for all of us, because again, it's these stories that we tell each other in closed door settings that are so painful that we're like, we can't let anyone else know because we might lose our job or some kind of repercussions going to happen as a result. But it was Elena and I who said, you need to tell this because people need to learn from your experience. And out comes these stories. And it's written as a case study book where folks in higher ed, whether they're administration, staff, or faculty, can use as a tool. So I use this in my master's degree program, who are students who are training to be practitioners in higher ed. And we go through these case studies, and they have all marginalized groups represented that talk about issues from faculty perspective, issues from students with disabilities, issues from Native American students' perspective. I have a case in here that happened to me actually at CU that I wrote about. Elena had a case in here that happened to her that she wrote about. And then we workshop them with our students, and our students are like, whoa, this stuff actually happened? We're like, yes, they happen. And then it's a resource. And so we have discussion questions that you can have with your audience. And there's research that each author has done as a result to back up their case. And so it's a really, really cool tool. And so this was released last summer, and it's going like gangbusters. And my cousin Daniel Luna did the artwork. So this is a part of my family legacy. And yeah, so that's our case study book.
Such a talented artist, and it's so awesome to see his work on that book.
Yes, we're excited.
And you know, even the case studies that you're talking about, those are real stories, real people that experience these things. You know, I know you know very well the climate that we're in this country. You know, following the horrific scenes from George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and the countless others that have experienced, you know, these tragedies, and COVID, you know, all of the stuff that we're dealing with right now. What is your take on the current climate and with the protests that are happening all around? We've seen that they're trying to pull down the Juan de Oñate statue in Albuquerque at the museum with chains, you know, and people are, you know, they're sparking up all over the U.S. And talking about stuff that has sort of been, that hasn't been highlighted and talked about in a long time. And so I just kind of want to get your take on the climate and where you think if these movements, these protests are going to make a difference, and where you think we're going from here.
I'm proud of the young people right now, more than they could ever imagine. I think these protests we are in a new wave of activism that we probably haven't seen since, you know, the civil rights movement. And I'm proud that they're happening. I think it's disheartening that it came so late, because I think these issues have been brewing for decades. But I'm proud of this generation, this next generation, who are taking it in their hands and saying, we've had enough. We still have so much work to do. I can't say we're there. We're not there. The injustices will exist as long as I'm alive. I know that. I'm a realist. As long as you have power, you will have oppression. And I teach that in my everyday world. I teach power, privilege, and oppression. And so until we equal the playing field, I think we will always have these types of outbursts. But this one seems different to me. I don't know what the end result's going to be. We're starting to see the little bits and pieces of change, but I have to be cautious. It all happened during the COVID pandemic. And so we were all raw to begin with. And I just think we're living in a really weird time.
That's for sure. Again, you know, you have so much wisdom and so much experience, and I'm just so grateful that you've done this interview with me, and that you're putting your stories out there, and you continue to do the work that you do at CU Boulder. It's so invaluable. Thank you again.
Thank you. Love you, sister.
Love you too. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you everybody for watching, and I hope you've been inspired by this snapshot of rockstar graduates and educators from the San Luis Valley. There's so many more I wish I could highlight. Stay tuned for more voices of talent and success in various areas and career paths coming to you soon from La Gente Legacy.